circumstances, broadcast the test score I have been instructed to pass on to you. And please behave accordingly. Thank you. I'll just check with the director and be right back. Excuse me. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It is my pleasure and delight, really, to be able to welcome you all here today on behalf of the Friends of Futuna Charitable Trust, and also to welcome those of you who are sitting comfortably in your homes and on your couches with a glass of wine in your hand. Welcome to you, our live streaming audience. This is the 12th Futuna Lecture, which commenced in 2011, if you can do the maths, because we dropped a year for some reason partway through. Before we get underway, I'd like to make the following statement. 61 years ago, Futuna Chapel was designed by architect John Scott, and it was designed as a sacred place of retreat, contemplation, reflection, worship, song, music, poetry and prayer. And the role of Futuna has not been diminished with the change in its life since it was sold in 2001 and its re-emergence into public life in 2008 when the Trust celebrated its very first public open day here. And as we are discovering with our ongoing open Sundays, they are every month. First Sunday of every month, the chapel is open from 11 to 3 for visiting. It is becoming a place of pilgrimage for many and for a variety of reasons. It's a building that keeps on giving. People are continually discovering and encountering the chapel's hidden taonga, and I'm one of those. I do visit the chapel quite often, as my dear wife will tell you, and every time I visit there is something new to experience, or it reveals itself to you. So I urge you to make this a destination for you when you want to visit, perhaps when there aren't so many people. It's also worth noting that for the second time only that the Futuna Lecture Series has been presented in 3 different worship spaces. Firstly, on Wednesday night in Auckland, the neo-Gothic Anglican Church, St Matthew's in the city, and last night in Christchurch in St Andrew's College Presbyterian Centennial Chapel, designed by Architectus and winner of the John Scott Award for Public Architecture in 2018. And tonight here in Futuna Chapel, which has really become a secular space rather than clearly defined as when it was designed as a Catholic worship space, it is considered by many to be the masterwork of John Scott. So we need to thank people who have provided support to the Trust and therefore to the chapel over the years, and without their support this lecture series could not take place, nor could the Trust exist as an entity, and nor could the chapel be cared for and open to the public. We are a charitable organisation and all trustees are volunteers. We don't have any regular income, but we do have regular outgoing, as our treasurer will tell us every time we meet, which is once a month. There's the rates and the insurance and the power and the cleaning and the maintenance. Therefore, we rely solely on koha and the generosity of our friends and our sponsors and supporters. And this is the major fundraising event for the Trust annually. So I'd like to name a few people, if I may, who have been supporting us, some right from the beginning. And I'll start with Dulux. And tonight we're joined by Simon Blinko and Serena Smiley from Dulux, who is they have been involved since 2011 when Tony Laird was, I forget his role then, but he's now the national manager for Dulux here in New Zealand, and he was hoping to make it here tonight. I'd also like to thank Plytech, who are represented here tonight by Craig Floyd. Metalcraft have been supporting the Trust for many years, but they send their apologies. And also I'd like to thank Architectural Profiles Limited, and David Waters is here tonight. He's the marketing and sales manager. He's very tall, so you'll notice when he stands up. I'd also like to say thank you to the Wellington branch of the NZIA. Rick Slesser, who's the chair, is unable to be here tonight, so he sends his apologies, but we haven't been able to pursue these series without the support of our NZIA as well. And at head office, of course, they also support running this event because it enables architects to improve their understanding and quality of their professional practice. And a special welcome to our patron, Chris Cochrane, significant New Zealand heritage and conservation architect, and he's accompanied by his wife, Margaret. And also a special welcome to Stuart Gardine, the 2015 NZIA gold medalist. Welcome. So for the first time in its 12-year history of the lecture series, Futuna Trust decided to operate this event on a koha basis. And we are grateful for the koha that supports the Trust and this event, and therefore the chapel. And in doing so, you become members and supporters of the expanding secular congregation of Futuna. And I mean, the concept of koha, to me, as a New Zealand Pākehā, has been one that I'm still coming to understand properly. We've still got to do a bit more work on that, but a couple of definitions may help, certainly help me. Koha is an offering, a donation, a contribution, especially one that maintains social relationships and has connotations of reciprocity. Or, koha should be an expression of how much importance you put on the event. It is not a gift, as you got something in return. That's from the IRD website. It is tax payable. So there is a little box on the table there where you came in, and it's got this image on it, which is by the hand of John Scott, and it's dated March 1959, and his phone number is 6212. So if you feel some reciprocity coming on, you can use the, you can just fold it and put it in the box, or, you know, we are moving towards a cashless society, so there is a card there with some very special numbers on the back which you can take with you if you want to koha to the Trust. I have a very short PowerPoint presentation, which is a little bit superfluous because we are in the chapel. I'm going to show you pictures of the chapel. So, but I am doing that because we want to celebrate the fantastic collaboration of John Scott, the architect, and Jim Allen, the artist. Jim turned 100 this year in July, and Jim's contribution to this chapel is enormous. So what I'll do is I'll go to the PowerPoint and introduce you to Jim and his work. But before I do that, I wanted to show you this drawing. This is dated in 1958. It's a preliminary drawing by John Scott of his thinking of the chapel. And as John did on a lot of his design drawings, he'd write little notes, sometimes a poem. And on it, it says in the sort of top to the top right, caressing the tips of the rough cast plaster. And then the spread of light gradually over the whole surface, as in the two upstairs bedrooms. And there he's referring to the bedrooms in Hamoana where he was born. And then bang, as it travels down the whole wall, good in colour, but not enough money to afford glass. What else? So even then he was thinking about what was going to be happening in the chapel during the day. And he goes on to say, this idea would automatically result in variety, not induced, but as a natural occurrence in nature, season to season. So when you do visit this chapel and the sun's out, or there's some cloud and sun, there is a vibrancy of colour and movement in this space which really brings it to life. Well, this is just to show you that John Scott could actually draft as well, so he drew all the detailed drawings for this building. And there's an interior shot of the chapel taken during construction, and for those of you who can see, you might notice the hobnail boot poking out of underneath the altar on this side, and that's one of the Maris brother builders chiselling away at the granite altar here behind me. This is John Scott, the architect, taken at Hamoana, and this is his collaborator, Jim Allen. So Jim designed the, well, they haven't turned on, the coloured perspex triangular windows which you see behind Jim in that photo, and that was the sort of effect you got. That was photograph was taken in 1986 by the late Gavin Woodward, and more recently by Paul McCready of the coloured perspex. So he found the product. He couldn't use glass. ICI were experimenting in perspex because the British Rail, their signal lights were getting smashed all the time. They were glass. They wanted something that was stronger, and they came up with perspex. And they gave John Scott some samples and said, maybe you could use this. Jim also designed and made the Stations of the Cross that run as a sort of a narrative of the crucifixion anti-clockwise around the chapel. They're made out of fibrous plaster and backlit. And so you can see them, they're all around you. Jim also experimented with the modulation of light, and you can see that on the left. It's a piece of work, a sculpture that he made to sort of diffuse and bounce light around. And John Scott asked him about, again, you can't see that, but there's two big light modulators above the doors, which you can see in these photographs, that actually modulate the afternoon sun that can really pour in here, particularly in summer. Jim here welcoming the Christ figure that he carved. It took him 3 months. He was in a stable in Parnell, I think it was. It disappeared from the chapel and was gone for 12 and a half years. And when the police found it in North Taranaki, it was in this sort of condition. It was too large to fit into the evidence room in Wellington Central, so they put it on the boardroom table till it could be collected. After being returned to the chapel, it then went to Te Papa. They took it into their care, and then Carolina Izzo, an Italian-trained conservator of art, restored the Christ figure, and we found out when she told us she wanted to be involved that her speciality in Italy was the restoration of crucifix figures. So we had the right person for the job there. And the crown of thorns on the head of the figure, which you can see there and also there, were made by the sculptor Greer Twist as a replacement for the lost crown of thorns. And there's also a wonderful book on Jim's work. And in celebration of his 100th birthday, we sent him a very large bunch of colourful flowers, which he rang a few days later and was delighted to receive them. And so, just again to thank our sponsors, who, again, without your koha, we could not do this. And also, I need to mention the Warren Trust, which is based in Christchurch, and the New Zealand Institute of Architects, and the Futuna Trust. Oh, there's those numbers again, sorry. But now it's my absolute privilege to introduce Michael O'Sullivan. He's the second only New Zealand-born practising architect to deliver the Futuna Lecture Series. And in talking with Michael, discovered that we are possibly cousins of some distance. Michael's father was from Castletown, Berehaven in Ireland, and my mother's great-grandmother came from Skibbereen. She was an O'Sullivan as well, and those two towns are only 78 kilometres apart, so there's a good chance we're connected. And I also had the privilege of visiting Michael's Arrowtown house, which you'll see in the presentation, in 2019. And I remember leaning against the ply-clad wall to the living room, which was canted outwards towards the street. And I just found myself resting against this wall with a colleague. And it was a really comfortable place to stand. And there I was being responded to by the architecture. And I asked Michael later, I know I briefly met him, what angle he used, and he gave me a bit of a throwaway comment at the time, but I reckon it's around about 4 degrees. He may correct me, but it was very, very comfortable. So these buildings were responding to the occupants. and that's the degree of a chairback, typically. He comes from a unique background and set of experiences, and he has developed an uncompromising approach to architecture that is both pragmatic and beautiful in its resolution and execution. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Michael O'Sullivan, Futuna Lecturer 2022. It's all yours, cuz.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for making the effort to come out on a funny old Saturday night. And to you, Nick, thank you very much for your kind words. It is very flattering that you've asked me to do this talk, but I couldn't help but think surely there are more interesting people in this country than me, but nonetheless I appreciate the opportunity. Te tere hini, if that didn't make John Scott smile from heaven, I don't know what would have. That was beautiful, girl, thank you very much. And to all the sponsors, it seemed to be the same sponsors that sponsor everything architecturally. Thanks, your contribution is much appreciated. In 2016, I took all the kids to Ireland to show them what sort of gene pool they came from, and then take them on a tour of significant worship spaces around that land. And this Catholic monastery is a World Heritage Island called Skellig Michael, and it's 15 miles into the Atlantic Ocean from where Dad was born in Castletown, Beer. I understand that the Irish sent all their best thinkers, prophets, poets, theorists and writers there, simply so they could get to know themselves. This is a view back to that fishing village where the old man grew up in, and the other Skellig Islands in the background. And the monks caught fish, they grew potatoes, ate birds' eggs, they fought off Vikings, and they spent most of their time in prayer between the 6th and 13th century. This was a common expression during the tour. But the point I was trying to get across to the kids was that a thoughtfully considered worship space should be like a thoughtfully considered domestic space, and that its sole purpose was to inspire you to be the best that you could be, regardless of the challenge in front of you, be it the 6th or the 21st century. This Catholic church, St Angus in Donegal, was the Irish building of the century in 1962. It's a magical thing that sits on the brow of a hill in a magnificent landscape not dissimilar to Central Otago. Stone from the existing castle was reused, rainwater heads discharged into ceremonial baptismal fonts, hand-cast bronze handles, elegantly proportioned windows, and a light spire that you could boot. There were hand-carved stations of the cross from Irish oak. Dad, is that where our prayers are meant to go? I think so, Mary. Just don't get too close to it. If I had to vote for a New Zealand building of the 18th century, it would be Rua's Courthouse. I just love the way his afro determines the entranceway in the bottom right-hand image. But back in Ireland, this would have been St Patrick's Courthouse, a watering hole where he baptised people, drank from and possibly did watercolour paintings from when he wasn't on the hunt for snakes. But this is one place where I do watercolour paintings from, and it's part of the process of our job that I wish we could do a lot more of. So I try and spread it right across this full spectrum of the role, from the atmospheric representations of land, sea, sky, or simply the energy of the land, to the rising and the setting of the sun or the moon, to the possible formation of something in plan in light of the shortest and longest days, to details at 1 to 1, 2, 5, 10, and the odd castle. Then into something that inevitably might represent a built form, this being a vineyard and restaurant and sort of conference facility we're working on. But this project here is in Onuku, just past Akaroa, and it's notable for being the first place where the Treaty of Waitangi was signed, as well as where Te Rauparaha ran amok. And it's a land that used to be smothered in an enormous totara. The landscape now is incredibly masculine and somewhat unforgiving without that totara. And this is Kate setting up a picnic on the actual site where we want to build this retreat, looking north over the marae to Bosu, Wainui and the peninsula known as Onewa. In both our North and South Island studios, we model everything, no matter what scale the project is. This retreat in Onuku is 57 square metres, and it has a 23 square metre 2-bedroom mezzanine and a little rooftop gloriette. And modelling it at sort of 1 to 50 allows us to resolve many structural, constructional and compositional matters. You sort of enter the space through a central compression limb, a bit like Rua's Courthouse. I just now need to get the clients to grow square afros. And there's a clear plastic downpipe in the interior of the space that allows you to see the water being caught off the roof, discharging into a tank below it. And the intention here was to set up this sort of calm repose upon the land for this young family so they can watch its regeneration back to what it might have been when Moa walked among the totara. I think 90% of the country would have loved to have been inside Bill's head when he was painting these things. I often wonder whether the moa had entered his head as well. This may well have been the last photo of him in his Littleton studio painting away, and we were doing some work on his double-storey villa at the time when I'd asked him if I could model in rhino 3 of his creatures and then build them human scale out of resin and then put them in our garden looking down to his studio. He looked at me pretty strange and went, "That's a pretty cool idea, but I'm not sure why you'd want to do that." Anyway, when he had moved on, I approached our neighbour, who was the council consultant for art in Christchurch as a city, and suggested that we did it on a much larger scale, 12 to 18 metres high, and locate 3 of them in the centre of the roundabout when you come out of the Littleton Tunnel. And the council were right behind it and thought it a beautiful way to celebrate him. They would be positioned looking towards his final resting place, and Kitty rightfully asked Bill's family, and they said, might be a bit too early, but I love the idea that you could drive through the tunnel and see nothing but lavender, bees and legs. The Moriori on the Chatham Islands have the longest covenant of peace of any people on the planet, and you can kind of see this positive impact that the covenant has had in the eyes of the islanders today. They are inventive, resilient, fearless and highly productive. I tried to get Matthew Ridge to go for a swim with me when we were there last year, but he wasn't having a bar of it for some reason. Anyway, when we got to the airport to go to Pitt Island, the pilot said he had to warm up his chopper, and he'd flown over where we were going to go for a swim, and he saw this thing, 7 metres long, swimming inside the breakers, only 50 metres from the shore. Matthew Ridge then spent the rest of the trip looking over his shoulder at me. And we've just finished a small 2-bedroom home for a friend of mine halfway between Waitangi and Owenga on the Chathams, and he's a fisherman who swims with these things, diving for paua, crays and blue cod, and he currently dives up to 20 metres in depth for an enormous scallop species that the Hong Kong Chinese are addicted to. The home is completely reliant on the energy from the sun and the wind, and it's a testament to the attributes I mentioned earlier about the covenant of peace and influencing the people. It's 7 metres long. We would have been an hors d'oeuvre. I mean, or Matthew might have been an hors d'oeuvre, I might have been a starter, but everything had to come from New Zealand. 60 tonnes of concrete aggregate was in one ship, and the home was a primary structure of just lightweight steel portals and DHS rafters to mitigate shipping costs. And the home is orientated north-south with a focus back, with a view back to Waitangi and the setting sun. And this is a view from the kitchen, with Matthew looking over his shoulder. John and Bridget chose this site on the Priest family farm as John was taken by sightings of the endangered yellow-breasted Chatham Island parakeet in the bush to the north. And with that, he cut a driveway in with a D8 and a digger 2 kilometres long to get to the desired site. And you can kind of see a road at the top right-hand corner. And he had cut a road through a quarry, across a stream, through the mangrove marshlands, and up the hill so he could be beside this bush. Solar panels are elevated and away from any cattle, and the cray pots that need to be welded up and maintained using welders and grinders, etc., are done so on that concrete slab in front of the garage. And you can kind of see the native bush where the endangered parakeet resides to the north of the home, and Bridget now takes visitors on tours through this native stand. And the lockdowns have been fantastic for the islanders. Many New Zealanders went there simply to get away. But wind and wild weather are a huge factor on the Chathams. Trees are famously horizontal due to the incredible wind pressure. And Bridget's brief to me was concise and clear. Michael, I could be stuck in this bloody thing for 3 weeks at a time, so it better be good. That's the sort of brief you don't need to write down. And this is a 30-seat worship space on the Chathams. It's a place where people would have come together to say goodbye to loved ones, celebrate weddings, or simply seek solace and inspiration, regardless of what they believed. This is the township of Waitangi. The red circle is where the worship space is. The arrow is where the shark was. And John and Bridget's home is where the X is. And the Moriori had this traditional waka made of korari and bull kelp for buoyancy, and they reputed it could take up to 30 people on voyages between the islands. And it was intended to allow water to penetrate through the hull so they could get over breakers and navigate big seas. And it was something that I thought could be used conceptually in this worship space, and that light could act like the water through the waka and filter gently through the space. And the foam sort of rises to meet the view north and up the beach, while light could gently wash through at foot level, just like the waka. But the Chathams are a magnificent, wild set of landscapes. They're primal and they're inspirational, and they're well worth a visit. But back in the South Island, the Free Wesleyan Church of Tonga were gifted land in Wigram to establish a base. And we were asked to explore relocating a classroom onto the land for the purposes of a hall, but we couldn't find anything remotely suitable, so we drew up a very simple 400 square metre building that was built for around $2,000 a square metre. And halfway through documentation, the church said, why don't we make it a worship space? And at every turn, the project was full of ritual. Here, the first foundation ceremony. And at the opening ceremony a couple of months ago, the building was dressed in beautifully woven flora and fauna, and hundreds of people had turned up from all over the country to celebrate. This is a view of the building looking back to Banks Peninsula. And the gifted land is smack in the middle of suburban mediocrity. I just certainly hope that the neighbours like Sunday morning singing, because it's beautiful. And the interior is full of beautiful Pacific-inspired colours and textures. And with a ceiling from burnt Portuguese cork, it's intended to emulate the inside texture of a coconut shell. And this cork is typically used for insulation of homes in Europe, as it's basically the leftover of the cork tile process that is then put into a big press and cooked, and then it's chopped up. And Grant England, the carpenter, was just exceptional to work with on this project right through the uncertainties of all the lockdowns. But the January volcanic eruption and subsequent tidal wave caused absolute mayhem in Tonga, and people have been living like this since then. We'd come up with an emergency structure that was 4.8 by 7.2 in size. It would be perfect for a home, school, worship space, or merely gathering while the people of Tonga could get back on their feet. And we'd made a prototype based on a kit of parts that could be put into a cargo net and then dropped onto the outlying islands with the New Zealand Air Force Sea Sprite helicopter, and then assembled within an hour. And most of the outlying islands like Atata don't even have a wharf, hence the need for a Sea Sprite. But with the best intentions from this country, the unit price was like $9,800 each, and we could get it out of China for $2,300. We then had a meeting with the minister responsible for such decisions, and she said, pretty much, nah, it's not our problem. This is a cute little exercise pavilion and onsen at the back of an exquisitely restored Californian bungalow in Onehunga in South Auckland. And there's really something quite beautiful about a simple building that can be either completely open or completely closed. Adjustable cedar blades are sort of lined up with the structural system of the building, and 6mm stainless steel rope and tensions are used for wall plane bracing. There are no visible fixings in the pavilion, and Glenn, Tig and Naomi, the carpenters, put it together like a jewellery box. There's a cedar tub at the rear and space at the front for exercise, and the roof is made from damplon out of Jerusalem that sits under this beautiful magnolia tree. So dappled light adds to the whole drama when the blades are closed and the wind is blowing and you're sitting inside this tub. O le tangata maulona inga, o le tangata maulona whaasa moanga. Every person belongs to a family, and every family belongs to that person. And in these homes in semi-rural Christchurch, three generations live under one theatrical central roof, a bit like in a Samoan village whale. Built on a floodplain, the last thing I wanted the homes to suffer from was that it was dictated by that control. The homes hold a very simple sort of Claude Megson theory of compression and expansion, and this shot of the back of the western home cleverly captures the compression with the half moon above. 2 cows, 2 chimneys. And with a simple pallet of native recycled timbers inside, it was intended that families and any visitors be instantly relaxed, warm and inspired. And this is Rob and Christine's bedroom at the western end of the homes. The radiators that Rob had imported from England are just amazing. He had them repowder coated to try and calm down a wee bit. And the void in the centre is used for the parking of cars and kids' birthdays, parties, and all manner of children's activities like bike riding and skateboarding and hockey practice. It is a set of homes that delivers a sense of love and nurture that warms my heart, simply because Rob, the grandfather, built it with love and nurture. But love is a dangerous word in the game of architecture. I was 21 when Nick Stanish put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "This game is a lot like love, Michael. You've got to learn how to let go just at the right time." And the studio I built in Littleton is put together only on love. And we've just added to it accommodating a library, workstations and Marais-style sleeping. It also showcases an aluminium joinery system that Andrew and I have been working on for the last 5 years. It's being a contemporary play on the English steel joinery from the 1860s. Fully welded, it is intended to be a sort of central reaction to the box section that we're so acclimatised to, and mullions, jambs, sills and sash frames are meant to be exciting and provocative to touch. You can kind of see that in the extrusions at the top of the drawing and on the left-hand side. We covered 3 suites, fixed glass, side-hung sash or door and an external slider. And we had it tested to very high wind pressure according to NZS 4211. And with handles built into the extrusion and exposed stainless steel rollers, it certainly has exceeded our expectations. The whole extension was constructed and then carved internally by Alistair, and it is intended that when you're inside the space looking south, it makes you painfully aware of the sky, the mountains and the water in that order. This home on Waiheke Island had its own hate blog. I didn't read any of it, but apparently there were some real crackers on it. Richard, the owner, he was an English fella, had told me that one of the comments was that the home was an act of architectural arrogance. And Ian Athfield had heard about this, and he rang me up and told me that it was a great achievement. And that made me laugh because I didn't really know what the achievement was. Anyway, the front faces north onto what used to be the island's tennis court, which is now a magnificent private garden for Richard and Anna and the kids. And if we could measure architecture by love, then surely the barometer is watching your client's kids grow up in the home that you've just drawn for them. I love this shot of Sid. This kid must be 16 now. But this guy, he built this house and he built many of our homes. 8 weeks ago, he died in my arms. He made the job of being an architect in this country and across the Pacific an absolute joy. The last thing he heard on this planet was my voice saying to him, "You are the most wonderful human I've ever met, and I love you with all my heart." And with that, he must have thought, "Okay, it's time to get out of here." But it takes courage for someone to ring up an architect and say, "Would you be interested in interpreting my expectations?" And it takes equal faith for that someone to then have a carpenter deliver such ideas. And if the word mana is measured in courage and faith in Palangi eyes, then this guy was sitting in the cream of the pavlova of mana. Another project he built was the additions and alterations to this workingman's cottage in Onehunga for Jason and Janine. This is the extension of it from the rear, the kitchen and dining. And he would always ask obvious questions like, "Why is it called a working man's cottage? I bet you it was the woman that did all the work in it." So he changed its name to the Working Woman's Cottage. Whawhatailava, siri whaafo, until we meet again, uso. At the other end of the country in Cass Bay is a home on the edge of Littleton Harbour, and it's a play on that liquid nature of that huge explosion that is the caldera of Banks Peninsula. So 3 bedrooms, 3 levels, 3 bathrooms, 5 supercars and an underground movie theatre, sort of carefully arranged on this tight organic footprint. The upper level has numerous incisions in the roof form to get the most out of the star and sky sets. And summer and winter are diametrically opposed. In that summer, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of people wanting to be at the beach. In winter, there's no one. And this drawing shows the start point of a masonry privacy wall where most people would congregate in summer before they headed down to the beach. But what was built looked nothing like these drawings, as we spent many evenings rearranging the blocks on site. There was much satisfaction in putting together all the built-in furniture for the home, and Brad was instrumental in pulling the whole thing together. So thank you, Brad, for all your great energy. And its relationship to Mount Herbert and Quail Island drove many of the proportional and compositional decisions on site as the project was unfolding, just like the masonry privacy wall. We changed much of the drawings while the process of construction was well underway. It's really rare to have families that are so generous that they wish to share the process of our game with every and anyone. And Aaron and Christine and Laura and Emma, thank you for your courage and your faith and your incredible generosity, and to Dave Walker for putting it all together. This 3-bedroom home in Taupo for Charles and Colleen looks over the lake and south to the mountains, and their daughter Emily is a celebrated architectural photographer who works in New York now. And when this project was in the conceptual stage in the studio, a well-respected architect was looking at the model for a long time, and after a few moments of uncomfortable silence said, it reminds me of the anus of a cat. Anyway, cat's anuses aside, it has a central north-facing courtyard which allows a reprieve from the bitter wind off the lake, and again, plenty of built-in furniture, making the home a beautiful home for all 4 seasons. Elevated above the street and intensely landscaped east, west, north and south, agrarian, native, formal and utilitarian, the home carefully sets up suspense and anticipation and was beautifully composed by Beck carpenters in Taupo. I once heard Tony Watkins say that it takes 50 years to get a family home right. And when we'd started this home 13 years ago in Mangere, I'd put a lot of leftover materials under the house. And a lot of those leftovers at the time were used to make bunks and other built-in furniture. And the home still serves us well to this day. It's always a treat to come home to this dining room table, thanks to Sam from IMO. But the lockdowns and Schedule 1 of the building code have been fantastic. We got all the kids out to get all the materials out from under the house, and we built a boxing ring out the back using primarily hand tools. Using just a handsaw, hammer and nails gave them great appreciation of how rewarding it is to put something together with a bit of time and lots of really bad humour. The boxing ring went to the side, and the new hangout space has given the kids much more than what they had imagined. This is another beautiful product from Portugal, a burnt cork tile. In the far north, in a settlement called Ohiwai is a 159 square metre 3-bedroom home for a couple in their 80s. The outcrop of rocks to the left is known as Lover's Leap in the middle of the farm, and it's far away from the old homestead that Sam was born in and spent 80 years in. And Chris and Sam still make produce from the farm today that is sold at the Kerikeri markets and online. The home is full of colour, rich textures and incredible paintings, and Hudnavasta was a friend of the family, would often visit the farm. But the idea that a home act as a health retreat becomes really important in your 8th, 9th and 10th decades. This home has given Sam, who has just beaten bowel cancer, and Chris a new lease of life since they moved in. And thank you, Andrew Lodge, for putting the home together so beautifully. Maori advocate that there are 10 levels to heaven, and I kind of like that idea. I think I'd struggle spending eternity on the same level as quite a few people, and it's a nice idea that you could change level when you felt like it. I claim that beautiful and purposeful architecture resides somewhere between one's Mauri, M-A-U-R-I, did I say that right today, Henny? Yeah, which is your life force, and Wairoa being the spirit of, be it the land or the bespaced heavens. And if that's the case, then the State House of the 1960s must reside up around Tāwhaki, which is 6 to 9 on this scale here. This Littleton State House underwent a serious number recently. It has a new elevated public pavilion that hovers above the existing State House, stitching Quail Islands with Mount Evan and Herbert. The kōrari for this north-facing deck is lashed to a steel frame that I welded up for Linda and Alistair on the hottest Canterbury day I can remember. And it takes the bite out of the Canterbury sun in the height of summer, as well as create lovely shadows on the deck and inside the home. The elevated pavilion is for family time only. There's no TV operating at this level, and the energy here is sensational for that exclusion. Audio-visual activities are in the existing State House in a chocolate-lined space that is perfect for music and movies, a space that Anthony Hoeti called the disco room. Browntown builders and Alistair put this home together with pure passion. And alterations and additions of another sort is this concrete villa in Mount Eden that we've just done. The brief Bridget gave me for this house, for this home, would make any architect salivate. She said, "I work really hard, and when I come home, I want to think that I'm on holiday." And I was really quite tickled by that. So a heated freshwater pool and ample tropical landscaping and a north-facing sun space certainly helps with days like we've had in the last month. And my utmost respect goes out for the medical profession and surgeons in particular, what they do in our society. So it certainly helped me pour the right amount of passion and love into this project, as with the onsen for Claire and Brendan. Egan is the Irish word for ocean, and skamal for cloud. And between and on the edge of them both lies this retreat at the top of the Coromandel Peninsula. A 7-bedroom multi-generational hideaway in Opito Bay. There's a triple-height void in the middle of the plan to assist with clarifying what is public and private. The lower public level has the walls longitudinally leaning out as an act of openness, and the triple-height void hovers over the kitchen, bouncing light around. The upper level, being the private realm, have the walls leaning in as an act of closure. And we'd put together an old-school fibrous plaster tile, a bit like these ones on the Station of the Cross, based on the section plan and an axonometric of the retreat to be read concurrently. And this was used to create the skimar layer within the home. So two different tiles were staggered, flipped, and rotated to capture the rhythm of the day. This is the main bedroom looking out the Great Mercury Island. And this is looking back to the main bedroom from the beach through the tussock. Paul Sayers carpenter did a magnificent job in putting this together so seamlessly. And in the middle of the Waikato, Matt and Winnie had asked us to draw up a small home for them. They didn't have any kids when we first started. Now they've got 2 beautiful children. The home sort of tumbles down this cliff underneath a single roof plane with a clerestory window framing the northern sun and the Waikato River. And the 1962 Woolley home in Sydney by Ken Woolley has a very similar topography to the site. And I was really intrigued by the sleeving of space that he had achieved under a series of 4 different roof planes. And Matt had introduced me to the ease of getting building materials out of China, which has been hugely inspirational. Here, wingy veneered plywood lines the whole interior of the home, making the kids feel like they live inside a chocolate cake. From the street, you've got no idea what lies below the block wall balustrade. And Matt had also purchased his own CNC machine that he had made, and he had made everything from the doors and window frames, lights, kitchen and laundry cabinetry, book and wardrobe shelving, and privacy screens, including the cutest kids' beds on the planet. And these double rectilinear downpipes sums the whole family up to me. That is, if you don't have families who are invested in the whole process, this game can be really hard work. Matt's dad had put together the downpipes, gutters, and rainwater heads that are mirrored at the street front on the garage. The Colorado River in Austin, Texas is similar to the Waikato in that it's peppered with hydro dams. An actor had contacted me to look at putting together a retreat for himself so he can play country music on the banks of the river and get away from the madness of Hollywood. So I went up there for 10 days and I put together a scheme that we used to hold talks with the City of Austin Planning and Building Departments and then discussions with carpenters. And the great thing about the Lone Star State is that the planning and building rules are really light, and the architect is responsible for full compliance. And this is what it should be like in this country. And I had a meeting with a confident 20-something-year-old duty planner who had explained to me in 3 minutes what the rules were, and then spent the next half hour asking me questions. And he kept on calling me boy. Boy, where y'all from? New Zealand. New Zealand? Ain't that up around Montana ways? No, it's in the South Pacific, mate. The South Pacific? Wow, where on God's earth is that? And I'd given him a book on the New Zealand landscape, and he thought that that was licensed for him to be able to ask me anything, and I wasn't ready for what was coming next. He must have looked at me and thought I was a good old boy. And it was the last year of Obama's presidency, and he asked me what he thought of us having a president of that colour. I said to him, well, if he was the president of New Zealand, I think we'd be pretty happy with him. You know, he's done some wonderful things like your Obamacare. He goes, well, hell, boy, where you all been having your head for the last 9 years? I thought, shit, I don't know. We're clearly not in Texas. Anyway, this is a Texas barbecue breakfast. This is what he gave me to get around on. Something quite free about riding down the motor without a helmet and the wind through your hair. I got to swim in this beautiful hole every day, and I went to 5 different country music gigs in 5 days, including Robert Earl Keen. But the year I was there, most people were terribly polite and predominantly God-fearing. But the year I was there, Texas lawmakers had approved open carry gun laws, and it was obvious everywhere you went, including the Robert Earl Keen concert. So I was certainly minding my P's and Q's. Back down in central Otago, Tim and Ingrid had built a compact little home in Arrowtown in a historic zone that required us to go to every person in the street and beg for forgiveness. The home was wrapped in hop-dip galvanised corrugate, and I had reference in my assessment of environmental effects the Chinese miners' huts in Arrowtown, and the council were just simply scratching their heads at that. The only thing the council said was, won't it be a bit shiny? I said, no, she'll be right. Give it a couple of weeks, it'll patina off, and it'll look just like those miners' huts. It took about 4 years for the patina to wear off. And it didn't help that Tim and Ingrid kept on wearing Ray-Bans everywhere. But Tim had trained as a carpenter straight out of school, and like Matt in the Waikato, had built just about everything in the home. We went down there to help him put his roof on at mid-30s temperatures. This is the front door, which was meant to emulate a crevasse in a glacier. This is from the interior. I've only had a handful of homes where people who have engaged me to do the drawings have then sold the home. And when Tim rang me up to say that somebody wanted to buy his house, I was fuming, farting and spitting like my Valiant on the motorway. But I could hear Nick Stanish saying in my ear, let it go, Michael. Just like on that Vogel's ad on TV. But now William and Yoko live there, and they love it as much as I do, so life goes on. Still in central Otago, and others who liked Tim and Ingrid's home, had asked us to look at a property just up the road, and the lunar-like landscape of Alexandria was perfect for Russell and Anne Beck to build their retreat upon. Their son is the very impressive Peter Beck of Rocket Lab, and their family is testament to the theory that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Russell got to spend one summer in the home before he had moved on, and he told me that it was the best summer he'd had on this planet, and that certainly made water get in my eyes. He was an acclaimed geologist, master of greenstone and civic sculptor. He had taught us so much about the various rock formations and the reasons why they and we were here and there. And Peter had sent this thing into the atmosphere after his dad had moved on, and I was simply amazed that it could be visible from Earth as it tore around the atmosphere before it disintegrated. Back in the North Island, on the west coast of Auckland, is a small home that we'd done for an equally impressive couple in the form of Barbara and Bob. And this is a very old photograph of the Watchman out at Karikari. It's a 130 square metre, 2-bedroom home around an intimate courtyard, and it access in the front to the rigours of the wild west coast. But being very public and well-known members of the community, they got the full treatment of the district plan and the madness of the Resource Management Act. And it was this project here where I was first introduced to the idea of getting local iwi to bless the whole process of our game. Feasibility, initial thoughts, opening up of the land and then occupation, having each stage blessed is something I really enjoy now. And Bob Harvey is a highly calibrated cat. I love collecting the black sand from the beach and then layering up the floor as we sealed it with layers of lacquer, and the cracks that had occurred naturally in the slab I'd filled with little copper shavings just before the last coat of lacquer. They're now this delicious green colour. It's an idea that I pinched off Frank after visiting Falling Water, where he had shellacked the stones inside the main living room to look like the bed of the waterfall. And it's really important to dream in this game. I've always imagined having a snooze on that daybed, but it's all part of letting go, I suppose. In gentrified suburban Christchurch is a garden like thousands of others that were liberated from their old homes thanks to the sheikhs. And this home for Scott and Tina has a plan that's gently curved to get the most out of the sun across all 4 seasons. The streetscape faces east and carefully conceals a formal garden and courtyard that enjoys the rising of the sun. And the level of craftsmanship in this home is up there with the best of boat building in New Zealand, thanks to a guy called Sam McCarthy. At the end of the day, the main bedroom is saturated in the setting sun, and it's one of the most proportionally beautiful bedrooms I know. It has a strong relationship to the pepper tree outside that had informed the cedar ceilings. Sam the carpenter had ripped 3,500 lineal metres of 140 by 20 coiler decking into thirds using my table saw to make this beautiful veranda, and once he had finished it, a supplier had seen the potential and then released a 45 by 20 board. It's a truly beautiful home that carefully respects the family and the garden it spent 25 years to develop. In gentrified suburban Devonport, this home would not even survive the drawing board without the help of Graham Burgess, architect. Hard on the footpath of Jubilee Ave and north facing the mountain, the public and private realms of this home are really free and uninhibited given its stiff upper lip context. And Graham's clever referencing of the group architect's work and the subtle suggestions of period detailing allowed the commissioners to see a way through the madness of the heritage controls in this part of Auckland at the time. And it's really lovely to be able to make something for a family after years of drawing and compliance. Here I made a dining room table out of Aussie blackbutt and a up and down light that traverses both the island and the table out of redwood. And like the daybed for Barbara and Bob, I would dream of having a bath here and sort of watching the ships navigate the Waitemata. But back out on the west coast is a home that we've just finished, and it has a powerful overall geometry that is driven by clusters of kauri tree stands in a rural setting. The upper level main bedroom sits in front of a really well-proportioned singular kauri that I would guess would be 50 years old. This is a 1:100 scale model of that bedroom. Primary and secondary forms of the home. And this is coming in from the Pacific like a kereru, a sober one. And we put together this 400mm wide aluminium weatherboard. It has a gentle curvature to it and a really rich texture. And the rest of the cladding is western red cedar. And the interior is lined with old kauri weatherboards off a local church that had just been pulled down. And there you can see that lone kauri there sitting in front of the main bedroom. And Murray Long's team were just magnificent to work with in building this home for John and Kate. There are 30 underwater volcanoes in the Kermadec Trench, and Raoul Island is an impressive outer-water volcano located halfway between here and Samoa. And Met Service had asked us to build a stainless steel shed to accommodate 2 very dangerous hydrogen tanks and a proton machine that makes hydrogen for their new automated weather balloon launcher. And I said that we'd draw it up on the condition that we could go up there and put it together. And Met Service asked, do architects do that? I said, yeah, architects do that. Yeah, we can do that. There's a practice note to that effect. I didn't say that. And so Baketech, who usually makes commercial kitchens around the Pacific Islands, built a 10 square metre shed from food hygiene grade stainless steel in Christchurch, and then drove it to Devonport, and we sailed 3 days on the HMNZS Otago to get to Raoul. And when we got there, the Sea Sprite had dropped it off flat packed onto the island, and we spent 3 days putting it together in absolutely beautiful conditions. Remana and Dr. Peter Wood of Victoria University came up to make it an absolutely wonderful adventure, and they're both here tonight. BakeTech in Wainoni built everything: hinges, bolts, doors, frames, vents, steps, ramps. And you can see the grunty roller pin hinges and latches that they'd made here. And the key to handling hydrogen is making sure that there's plenty of ventilation just in case of an emergency. The hut came together seamlessly, and we found ourselves with 5 days free. And Raoul Island has this 500-metre high mountain that Niwa were putting a 12-metre high mast on top of to keep an eye on the lake levels, seismic activity and subsequent tidal waves. And the Niwa guys hadn't prepared a critical path diagram as to what they wanted to achieve, and they accordingly found themselves short of time. And we were then asked to help the Niwa guys build the guy ropes, fabricate the mast, and then drop it onto its foundation using the Sea Sprite. The Navy, the Army, the Air Force, and the Niwa were involved in what I thought was a really cool job. And at the end of the day, we were all looking forward to being winched up into the Sea Sprite. But this fella here, he broke one of the 50 strands of the formal stainless steel rope. Then the Air Force said it was too dangerous to risk winching anyone else up there. But I was quite happy to take that risk after such a hard day's work. But at the same time, I did wonder how many strands I might have broken. We all then had to walk off the mountain, which was equally as beautiful, but I just love the way when he gets to the top, they just grab him and pull him in. But after 3 days sailing in these conditions, we were really glad to get back to the Waitemata. The bridge is 17 metres high and off the waterline, and you can see how big some of these waves are. People, including seasoned Navy staff and the ship's captain, were green and horizontal. I was amazed at how many were so crook. But these waves don't compare to the biggest wave this ship has ever encountered. This is a 21-metre high wave in the Southern Ocean. Keep your eye on the gun and listen to the nervous chatter in the background afterwards.
I looked away, I was scared.
Bisected. I was super impressed with our armed forces, and in particular the Navy. I wouldn't hesitate to any young person involved. Back in Mangere, this is the biggest living room in the country. A 50-metre by 50-metre space in Whavona for the Free Wesleyan Church of Tonga. This building can accommodate the Tongan royal family. That comes with much protocol when considering how such a space should come together. We had an opening for the building that attracted thousands of people, and this is the front of the building facing north. First, there were formalities with the King and Queen, and on the mezzanine you can see a maple-lined alcove for the royal family. They have their own entry, kitchen and bathroom facilities, and offices that run the church nationwide are located on this mezzanine. Then the most outrageous feast I've ever seen. There was no room for a plate or cutlery at the table, and the kids just thought this was fantastic. Crayfish sat on top of spit-roasted pigs and this unbelievably beautiful raw fish dish, and a dish called lu, which is beef, onions, and coconut cream wrapped in taro leaves. Oh, man. But Tongans sure know how to have a great time. It's no wonder Cook kept on sailing back there and calling it the Friendly Islands. Little did he know. There was much dance, singing and happiness like I'd never seen before, and to be asked to be part of it is a huge honour. So malo pito, Frederick Feki and Semi Pulu. The first Kohanga Rio in New Zealand was started in Wainuiamata in 1982, and we have been lucky enough to be involved in a number of them, thanks to Kara. Thank you for coming along tonight, Kara. This particular koanga is at Birkdale College. It's the first pink building we've done. It's a very rewarding typology to work on, simply because you know it serves a great purpose in our society today. So much so, I offer a scholarship for kids that have been through a koanga reo that then wish to study architecture at Auckland University. Here the kids are blessing the food at lunchtime, and I love the little girl in the middle high seat there. You see the kid in the red, he just wants me to leave because he wants to eat. This is the approach to the atia. And one of the kids at this koanga can't walk, so she drags herself around the beautiful, smooth Portuguese cork floors at great speed. She's a lovely little kid. And koanga reos are a wonderful opportunity to inject much colour and texture into a child's mind while they learn about who they are and why they're here on this planet. In industrial Christchurch is located Te Hohepa koanga reo. And it's based on a rigorous whetū, which is a star that the koanga has had since its inception in Christchurch nearly 25 years ago, although I knew nothing of this when we were putting together the preliminary thinking. The whetū has these beautiful colours that we had rotated on each elevation and then tied that in with the child's development through the years they would be there, starting in the east and ending in the west. And with government funding for only 1.5 square metres per kid, we had suggested a central courtyard to address the shortfall of space and the bitter cold winters in Canterbury. And this kid's name is Jesse James, and he certainly lived up to that reputation of his namesake. He was just a card. And I tried to get the National Trust, namely John, to buy wrestling mats for this courtyard, but he knew exactly what I was up to and he simply laughed at me. But I could see Jesse James's name at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas in 2037. The Trust did have a good budget for landscaping of the facility, and it gets thrashed whenever the weather allows in Christchurch. But I just love the fundamentals of the koanga in that the parents are invested in the facility and the child's growth. And the Irish have a similar program funded by the government called Near School, where kids are taught an almost identical curriculum. And like koanga reos, they're really hard to get into. This is the front of the Taipa koanga reo in the far north. And what I wanted to try and capture here is what a child might experience when dad or mum puts that kid to bed on a hot summer's night and they drop a sheet on the child and it gently floats down on top of that child. Most koangas have kids from all manner of different iwi and hapu. Not so in Taipa, most of the kids are Ngāti Kahu. And this is a photo of the opening. And when I was invited to the opening, I put on a suit and I drove up early in the morning, and there were hundreds of people present, and I only knew a couple and these two seagulls. And that must have been quite obvious because I noticed Honi Harawera walking towards me. And I thought, shit, he's going to come up and say, hey, g'day, my name's Honi, and welcome to Taipa, thanks for coming to the opening. He walks up to me and goes, what are you doing here? And before I could think of a sensible answer, I was telling him a story of sorts. I said, well, you see now, I was on the southern motorway and I usually take the Otahu off-ramp and turn right, but instead I turned left, and after 3 hours driving, I ended up here. He just looked at me and walked off. Anyway, after another 3.5 hours, I was asked if I'd like to talk, and given I can't kōrero, I opted to read the lyrics of Mahina Rangi Toka's song called When I Grow Up.
When I grow up, I want to be a rock and roll star, dance me around your living room. When I grow up, I want to be an all-black, chasing play and running for you. When I grow up, I want to be a model, challenge conversation and catwalk talk.
So when the lyrics of Mahina Rangi Toka's song must have plucked a few strings, because the next thing I knew, I was in photographs. I'd never met this guy before, but you've got to give it to him. His passion for his people and tikanga is uncompromising. And you can kind of see that in the interview that he has with Miriama. That's all over YouTube. I kind of like that. But the coolest thing about this photograph is the two seagulls on the roof. Mongolia is the least populated country in the world, and the city of Ulaanbaatar is struggling to accommodate the influx of their traditionally nomadic people. And we were asked to come up and do a presentation of different typologies using steel framing on behalf of a local developer to the Mongolian government and other interested parties. And we'd come up with 6 ideas ranging from 40 square metres up to 160, and they were based on the native alpine flowers of Mongolia, because that's all I had to go on. This is a 1-bedroom 40 square metre, the 2-bedroom 60 square metre meant to be a steel girt, an 80 square metre that I named the Segal Ul, and the government loved this one because the Segal Ul is this beautiful little native flower that is the silver fern of Mongolia. And the 3-bedroom 100 square metres over 2 levels, and a duplex with a courtyard for goats. But the main reason I went there is that I wanted to compete in a tournament called the Nadam Festival. It's a celebration of Genghis Khan's army skills that occurs every year in May. And the first of the 3 skills contested is wrestling. It's not like Olympic wrestling, it's based on a simple takedown. So if you put your knee, your elbow, your hand or your butt down, you're the loser. 1,092 men come onto the National Stadium, and it lasts for days until the last man is standing. I got the Mongolian yeah nah. It was all good when I was in New Zealand, but when I got up there they said, well, in 800 years a foreigner has never competed in our game, so we're not going to start now. Interestingly, they are bare-chested because one of the first Nadams was won by Genghis Khan's daughter. And they thought to avoid further embarrassment they would come up with this rule, but I'm not sure how foolproof that rule is. The second skill is archery, shooting a distance of 75 metres into a 75mm diameter bullseye. It's incredible to see. And the third being horse riding, being a 30-kilometre race across the vast wild Mongolian landscape. When I was there, a 6-year-old boy rode a 6-year-old mare to win and then was an instant national hero. It's not for the faint-hearted. The majority ride without saddles, and there is an incredibly high attrition rate. And then they all head off to these race clubs in these supersized girts and drink copious amounts of really bad vodka. I'm not sure what was more dangerous, the horse riding or the aftermatch function. You've got an option culturally. You can either drink fermented horse milk and wash that down with a goat's cheese biscuit, or drink really bad Russian vodka. So it was a pretty simple decision for me. As a country, we spent $950 million on MIQ accommodation during the lockdowns, with the majority of the facilities being owned by offshore companies. Quail Island would have made a sensible MIQ venue, being a former leper colony and quarantine station. Self-contained, fully insulated carbon fibre units could have been fabricated in Wellington and choppered on and off as required. And when no longer required, they could have been used as minor dwellings for the younger members of our society that are struggling to get going. Wellington would have made a great venue for a 50,000-seated stadium with a retractable roof, using the same narrative that Zaha had suggested in Muslim Qatar. New Brighton needs a counterpoint to the city of Christchurch. Andrew and Glenn, who I work with, are wonderful men and beautiful thinkers, and having a studio in each island that complements each other is a privileged thing that takes a huge amount of energy. I ask that the young men and women that work in these studios go between each so that they can get the most out of this magnificent country. This journey started when I spent a week with Busen and Stress Architects in Peter Bevan's Canterbury Arcade building, and both Graham and Ray were hugely inspirational at that critical age, and Graham still is to this day. The guy on the right is Nick Stanish, who taught me how to think at university. I have the highest amount of respect and love for this guy, and I'm blessed to have had the start and to have had time with these magnificent architects. There are more people alive on the planet today than those who have ever died in the history of humanity. Therefore, what we do has never been more important. Architecturally, we are privileged and spirited land, a spirited land and our built environment is on top of the world. I've just made this claim based on what my eyes have told me from travelling around the planet. We have some amazing architects in this country that keep producing work that the whole world is looking at. And the guy on the left has taught and influenced most of these architects, but being an academic is a thankless role, so I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone that works in tertiary education. The guy on the right is trying to figure out what his old man does for a job. Don't worry, son, I'm still trying to figure that out too. A 95-year-old man wanted me to draw him up a letterbox once, and I'm guessing he wanted to see more letters. So I made him a model at 1 to 20 and he loved it, and then he built it. I suspect he was disillusioned and disheartened with me, with digital communication. If no one ever sent me another email or text message again, I'm sure I'd be pretty happy with that. So do me a favour, everyone. Tomorrow, write a letter to somebody who you love, preferably on unlined 200-gram watercolour paper using a fountain pen. And that's all I've got to say in the matter, so thanks for coming along.
Michael wants to go and sit down and hide. I know this has been a tough gig for Michael. He's told me almost every day. I've been with him, and it's been a wonderful trip for me because I got to know with his staff in Auckland and stay in his family home in Mangere. And I forgot to mention Melissa's here tonight, Michael's wife, and your son, and obviously other friends and extended whānau. So my apologies for not acknowledging you before. You always save the best to last. And I spent 2 days in Littleton in the studio where Michael goes down each week, and there was 5 staff. Well, not staff, they're team members really, because they really do work as a team. But there's a lot of energy comes from this guy. I know he takes in a few calories, but but he uses them all. He uses them all every day. The energy, the energy that I got from being with Michael and his colleagues was just amazing, and I managed to get to the top of Quail Island Hill with only one rest, which I thought was pretty amazing. So I want to thank you for your hosting of myself, but also your generosity in giving this lecture series. I know you took the job really seriously. You're uncompromisingly honest, and I know that, at school, Michael went to Sacred Heart in Auckland, I went to St Bernard's in Lower Hutt, and we were taught by the same order of brothers. And I often got on my report card, Nick, you could do better. And maybe you got that one too, Michael, occasionally.
I was asked to leave.
Well, I think tonight you did your very best.
Oh, thank you, Nick.
Yeah, and I know you are a person who puts everything they've got into what you're doing at that time, and it's truly, truly amazing. I also want to thank again our sponsors, and for you for attending, for your koha. I want to thank the NZIA. I want to thank the trustees that are here tonight and our patron, Chris. May you keep bringing the chocolates to the trust meetings. And also our AV crew. This has been live streamed, as I told you before. Every event like this we have at the chapel, we re-record, and we're working on a digital archive to make that accessible. So thanks to Tony and Rob, Chris, Alex on camera there, Roger, who's around here somewhere, and his partner Phil from Metro, who provide us with these wonderful TV screens and setup. So thank you all very, very much. I think Michael is quite happy to answer questions, and if there are questions, we've got 2 microphones because we want to pick up the question in the record, and Michael will give a response. Are you still on for that, Michael?
I think there's an All Black game on.
Is there? Okay, we'll have a couple of short questions. But I'll kick it off. Michael, you may have noticed, has always credited the clients and the builders and suppliers, and he's acknowledged their input, their creativity, and I know that putting together a building, even if it's a simple house, there's a lot of decisions to be made and a lot of things that have to be communicated, and obviously building the model is really, really important for you and your team. But do you then sit down with the builder and go through the model with the clients? I mean, how do you stitch that team together that's going to deliver the project?
I suppose you try and make the marriage of the carpenter and the person who has that expectation and aspiration as soon as you can, so that they're part of the process right from the outset. And if you bring people in late into the piece, they miss out on the journey, and the journey should be full of passion and full of energy, and
And when you find a good builder,
yeah, you just you lock them up and put them in the back room. Don't let them go.
Were there anyone wanted to ask Michael a question? If you could raise your hand, and we'll get you a microphone.
I think they want to watch the test match too.
Yeah, maybe that's driving it. Well, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, and just give Michael another very warm round of applause.
I really appreciate everyone coming along, so thank you. Have a nice evening.
I've just got one more short announcement to make. This lecture series has been run sort of out of sync of our normal series, which occurs usually in March or April around the anniversary date of the chapel, opening of the chapel, that is. So it's September and it's colder and it's wet. So we're going to revert back to the summer series next year, and we do have the opportunity to be able to announce the lecturer for next year's series. We have gone offshore this time, now that travelling has opened up, but we haven't gone too far afield, and it's my pleasure to announce that Kirsten Thompson, Melbourne-based architect, will be delivering the Futuna Lecture Series 2023. Yeah. So everyone, be safe out there, watch the steps, watch the wet, and I suppose some of you want to get home as quickly as possible. But thanks very much. Oh, sorry, I've just forgotten something. Beg your pardon. I did forget a presentation to Michael for giving this lecture series. John Scott Works, second to last copy that's available in New Zealand, is now yours.
Oh, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Thanks, Nick.
And because we're both from Cork, a packet of Barry's tea. Blended in Cork.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.